Meeting is now being streamed live out on YouTube.
Okay, thank you, Pat. I still don't know if we're up on our webpage yet, so let's hang on for one more minute.
Okay, who are we missing? Whose turn was it to watch Allie? Let's see, we got Kevin, Marcus, Mark, Pat, Ren, Casey, Dan Druska.
I think we're missing Ed.
Yeah, I don't see Ed and I don't see Allie.
She's right above you on my screen, but she's here.
Oh, hi Allie, how you been?
Been good.
I wonder if Ed went to the other one.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'll try and give him a call and see.
Sarah, did you get the last issue statement?
No, I was just about to type a message that I'm still trying to figure out where that ended up. Sorry. Justin, if you would just email like the text itself to me at that email address, that might be the easiest because I'm not sure if sharing the link or whatever would work with that email address.
So here comes the fun part. You guys get to see Sarah Sells work her magic. She's been busy behind the scenes, but now you're going to get to see it. The one thing is she can move so fast on the screen that it occasionally creates seasickness. So if at any time you want her to slow down or something, just say so. Come on, Ed.
Mike, I just tried to call Ed. He didn't answer, so I don't know if maybe something came up or not. But we're good to go. We're streaming live on the webpage. So I think you can go ahead and start. I'll email Ed and make sure he has the right link.
Okay. Sarah, are you ready to take the screen?
Yep, just about.
Okay. So what we're going to do now as a group is, first off, we're going to look at the 4 different statements again, just briefly, refresh ourselves on what they contain, pick one and then start editing it. And again, the one that we pick is not necessarily the final in any way, shape, or form, or it's not an endorsement. It's the one that you think would be easiest to edit to get to where you want. And when it comes to the editing, for right now, let's not focus on micro editing, like change this word to that word, unless it substantially changes the meaning of what we're doing. So right now, the important thing is to capture the big ideas, and then we can go back and micro edit.
And you guys should see my screen now, correct?
Yep.
And we have options here, so I can continue showing this split screen. I've got 2 of them up at once. If that's too small, I can zoom in on one at a time.
Let's stay with split screen. Okay, so take a look at what the 2 groups we have here say. Okay, everybody put your head down on your desk once you're finished reading. Okay, let's look at, is it okay to move on to the next 2? Let's do it. Okay, so a lot of this stuff should be looking pretty familiar across all of the statements. You'll note there are some differences. So what we want to do now is to start to build the issue statement that the group agrees is the correct one for moving forward. And so, as I suggested, let's pick one as a foundation and then start cutting and pasting from others as needed. But again, the thing we're trying to do here is to fully explain the problem or the challenges of coming up with an effective elk management program in Montana. So first stop, which of the statements do you want to use as your foundation?
I liked group twos. It seemed to me like a lot of the opening statements for all four of them were pretty similar, and I just like the way group two condensed their bullet points, their conflicts.
Thanks, Sally. Other folks?
Which one do you think has the best, would be the easiest foundation to work from to integrate all our work?
Sarah, on group two, could you scroll down so I make sure I know what I'm talking about?
There's the rest of it there.
Is that the one I was talking about before the break? Let me look at the other ones real quick, Sarah.
Yes.
Okay.
One sec, let me get those back.
Okay. Yeah. I thought group twos was good, and that's not, to me, it's just a matter of presentation where some of the things they have in there are really getting at what the issue is and not necessarily what the solution is. And so I liked the way that things are worded, and I think it might make it easier to start off with that. Does anybody have any objections to doing that? Okay. So let's think about what is missing from the group two statement that is included in the other ones.
I think the group fours, I like their expansion on their paragraphs of, what Fish, Wildlife, and Parks are responsible for. It gives a little background about it hasn't been updated since 2005. It's, we're the fourth largest state, and I guess I would like that at the beginning of group twos.
So the paragraph that begins the Montana Elk Management Plan?
Yeah, I like both. I like both of the first two paragraphs on group four.
All right, Sarah, let's cut and paste them.
Okay. I can also stop sharing real quick, send this document with all these combined to all of you, so you can also scroll around on your own computers while we do this, if that might be helpful. And then
I think that would be really helpful.
okay, just one moment then. It's not working for anyone. It's saying there's a network disconnect. I'm not sure why.
It's coming in via chat.
Yeah.
Okay.
Is anyone able to get that, or is it just?
Sarah, when I was trying to share that last document, I got that same message the first time and I resaved it somewhere else and then tried again.
Okay.
So maybe just try again.
While we're awaiting, Pat, how are you holding up? Feel like you're drinking from a fire hose today, or you feel like you're catching up on what the group's been doing?
I think I'm catching up on what's going on.
Okay. Any questions or yeah, questions about what we're doing at this point?
It seems fairly straightforward to me right now. I won't hesitate to ask questions if I'm confused pretty bad.
Okay. All right, great. But if it seems straightforward, then I'm not doing my job.
All right, I am sending everyone an email to that same one that Lindsay sent the notes to yesterday at the end of the day. So that will hopefully work a little better. And I'll start sharing this again in just a moment.
Mike, just to let you know, as we're waiting here, Ren's computer crashed a minute ago, and so he's rebooting. So
Oh, for Pete's sake.
he's absent for the moment, but should be coming back.
Okay.
All right, and then you guys wanted to see some of Group 4's opening statements added to this, correct? So we're going to work on the left side of the screen here. This will be what we're adding everything to. And this is Group 2's statement as it was previously. And there are the top 2 paragraphs from Group 4. Is that what you guys were having in mind?
Okay, so you kind of have a couple of approaches to a preamble in there. So is there any redundancy?
There is about the update or updating.
So how would you like to deal with those?
Actually, that whole paragraph could probably be removed, or yeah, that whole section, I would say.
I agree. I think you can get rid of that highlighted section.
Probably even down below where it says challenges are diverse and differ across our landscape. It seems like they covered all those.
So
Yeah,
everything
and just
updated now?
start with the to be effective, maybe.
Yeah, start with to be effective.
All right, if I start editing things that you guys want me to put something back, just shout out that I'm moving too fast or whatever.
What other kind of edits do you want to do on that?
I think we wanted to get rid of that sentence that says Elka prominent in Montana, since we have up above, it says Elka RM. There you go.
think the same with the previous sentence. It's included in the top one as well. And I suspect we should probably pick a word between sustainable and appropriate, or expand that somewhere, unless we want to avoid the wordsmithing at this point.
Yeah, we kind of struggle with that too, because we weren't, I mean, they're both kind of value judgments, what's sustainable, what's appropriate. It kind of depends on where you're sitting and what your perspective is. So we were looking for different words too.
So this is going to get deleted as highlighted right here.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so is that a good preamble? Does that sort of capture the context? So just the top two paragraphs? Or is there something we need to pull in from others?
I think it looks good.
Is there anybody that feels like it is not enough, it doesn't look good, or anything needs to be changed?
I like that sentence on the bottom right document towards the bottom where it says to succeed. And I'm wondering, does that need to go in the preamble, or should it go into that next section to be effective?
I looked at that too, Everett, and I think that definitely needs to be included. I was wondering on if that should be included, like you say, in the next sentence or next chunk, or if that should maybe even round out the entire document.
I think it leads in pretty nicely to there are many commonalities among stakeholders. So if you had to succeed and then you started with got rid of to be effective, you use that to succeed sentence, and then you start with there are many commonalities among different stakeholders regarding, and then you start addressing.
Yep. Sarah, we can take out that to be effective sentence right there. Yep.
Shouldn't, in the top sentence on the right, mentions healthy. Shouldn't that be in with the sustainably and appropriately managed? You know, it's some mention of health of the herd, of the elk.
I guess, you know, yeah, we were trying to almost think of sustainable as healthy, almost synonymously, but I mean, I don't know. I'm not wed to those words. We put a slash in because we were struggling with which word to use.
Do you need sustainably, appropriately, or healthy in there, or is it enough to say FWP is responsible for managing elk populations?
I think that actually is probably not, I think you're right, because staying away from value judgments, I think is probably, or words that aren't super concrete in their definition.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you, Dan, because there is debate about what that means, right? That's part of the problem.
I agree with both of you guys, but I also think managing is a very broad term that by adding something that you are holding that managing to a higher level. And I don't know that sustainably or appropriately are the words. I was thinking actively. I don't know if that's the correct word either.
I don't know that we need to define how they're managing it at this point. This is just kind of an introduction to what we're going to talk about. I think as we go through this, we'll define what the expectations are for that management. And we might be getting into wordsmithing at this point. And I also think there's an element of what Dan was saying with value judgments. So I think we just say managing, and then we're going to define that managing later on.
That sounds good to me.
What do you think about effectively?
That sounds good.
I think it still contains a fairly strong value judgment. I mean, one definition of effective may be having alcohol across Montana. The other may be only on public lands. I'm not saying, but you know, I worry about that one too.
Yeah, I do too. Everyone, I think, might have a different definition of how effective management, what effective management.
Lindsay, sustainable's in statute, isn't it?
Yes, sorry, I was trying to find my mute. Yep, it is in statute a couple different times.
Well, and Lindsay, do you think it makes sense to try to follow statutory language as closely as possible? Or at least use the same terminology?
So the thing is the way it's referred to in statute currently, it's referring to our objective numbers that are set. So then it's still somewhat up to interpretation, comparing sustainable to those objectives. Are they sustainable? Could they be higher than they are now and still be sustainable? Probably. And so they're referencing the objective numbers that we know as of today in their term of sustainable. Does that make sense?
Yep, to me, yep.
I guess my point is I like that word in there. FWP is responsible for managing sustainable elk populations. I think it encompasses health and both the social and biological, but that's just my opinion.
Well, and Casey's right. It's not sustainable if one part of your population doesn't think what you're doing is effective or sound management. We all live in one tent, regardless of how big it is. And, you know, the department does have, you know, is striving, and I think elk are best served by as much consensus in management as possible. And so.
Any other thoughts on that preamble? Anything else in there that's important context that is currently omitted?
I was kind of thinking in that third paragraph when it kind of starts to list out stakeholders to add the non-consumptive users. I think that collar kind of got me thinking about that.
Yeah, I wonder about even the including residents parts. I feel like between sports people, outfitters, non-consumptive users, landowners, I wonder if we're getting a little bit redundant there.
I guess I'm curious if there's a need to really include a comprehensive list of who those stakeholders are at this point. I mean, it could be a pretty long list if we really get going.
I think when we were originally talking about that, we had residents in there, and then we also had non-residents in there. We took the non-residents out, thinking that the outfitters would advocate for them. So it's quite possible that we don't need that residents in there. You know, at the time we were discussing it, it was just to differentiate between the residents and the non-residents. So that was the background thinking anyway.
I also am hesitant to list these out purely because everyone identifies so differently. I mean, I don't particularly love the phrase non-consumptive users because I think if you're on the landscape, you're consuming part of that landscape regardless of whether you're hunting or not. I I would almost rather we be very general in how we talk about the stakeholders and let those stakeholders define themselves as part of that group.
I think
would
that's
echo.
a good idea. I think that would mitigate some future issues.
Because
Yeah.
I agree.
I think Ally's point about the non-consumptive user is really important, but I don't know, like if we start listing them out, as was said, we're going to get a really long list, and then yeah, I think talking about it in general terms would be better here.
The other thing you can think about is including but not limited to.
Or even, you know, elk management plan must collaborate with all vested stakeholders. I mean, something like that.
And I think you get into the vested part, what's the definition of that?
The whole last part of that sentence really doesn't even need to be there, does it? From the comma on.
It's a sound argument. I think I'm okay with it either way.
Yeah, I worry about leaving a group out that would like to see representation or at least recognition, or, you know, as Marcus maybe pointed out, just sort of mislabeling a certain group, the terminology that we understand, but not everybody does.
Yeah, we already got criticized once for not including the wolf people. So yeah, if you just want to cut it off at the comma there at Montana, I think it's okay.
Is everyone in agreement to chop that highlighted section, or did I hear some people thought we should retain that?
I'm in agreement to delete it.
Okay, it's
I have no
going.
objections.
You can always add it back later if you guys decide.
Capitalize all. I don't know if that helped or not.
I know in somebody's, I don't know, one of these older group ones that we worked on, someone had written something like for FWB to commit to collaboration with all stakeholders. And that, I don't know, that kind of maybe sounded better.
You remember where it was in any of these documents?
And that may be more of a solution too, though. Instead of I mean, what's the issue? I guess would be the question there.
Well, I guess this is still in the preamble part, not really in the listing of issues, but it does sound like a solution.
Hey, Mike or Lindsay, does the department prefer language like must collaborate or should collaborate? I mean, are we using words like must, or is it what sort of limitations, or, you know, how should we be thinking about that?
I'm going to defer to Lindsay on that one.
No, Dan, I think it depends on the context. So I don't think there's a blanket rule of we're not going to tell you, please don't use the word must, because that ties our hands, when in some instances, if the group agrees that that is something we must do, then you can go ahead and include it. So it really just depends. I don't know. It depends on what you're referring to. If it's, you know, something that's possible for us to always do and always undertake. I think Ken is still on. Ken, if you're on, what do you think? Or if not Ken, maybe Brian.
Yeah, sure. I'll take a swing at that one, Lindsay. I think, the things that I've observed with some of the plans that we have in place is often, and I think it speaks to some degree to the flexibility that the group talked about earlier on. Do we want to maintain flexibility? What aspects of it do we want to maintain that flexibility? And like Lindsay said, if it's something that's important, then must is probably a good word to use. But I think it's important to think about, where do you want to be able to use the flexibility? How do you want to implement the flexibility? How many times you use the word must kind of ultimately boxes us in. And that's one of the things I see in a lot of plans that we have in place right now is, you have to meet this objective and you have to meet that objective and you have to meet that objective. And you start looking at the union of all those have tos or must. And sometimes there is no place for the agency to go without violating that. And I'll just offer those thoughts.
So given that when we think about collaboration, I worry about the word all. I hate to go back to that, but all seems so broad that just putting on my commissioner's hat, if I was on the commission, the word all, somebody doesn't feel like they were consulted. All is pretty broad and it's kind of left up to somebody else's definitions. And I think you could just say must collaborate with stakeholders of elk management or, in Montana, but I'll leave that up to you guys. But I get uncomfortable with that word.
What if we said must collaborate with the diverse stakeholders of elk management in Montana, acknowledging that they're numerous and different?
That's a really good solution.
I think it would fit better under guiding principles than in the issue statement anyway.
It's certainly a guiding principle.
It is, but I think it wraps up the preamble nicely.
It does flow pretty nicely into the next conversation.
I think it actually bridges the gap pretty well, as has been said. And I like that it sets the tone for collaboration. I think for this plan moving forward to be successful, we're going to need collaboration. So I think having it here in the beginning sets that tone. I think we can also restate it further down, as Kevin was pointing out.
That's a good point. And I like the sort of the message about setting the tone for an issue statement. And I do like also, I like that collaboration is really a big part of that tone.
Yeah, I would make that the first sentence, essentially the next paragraph. So delete the space there. And so, yeah, and there are many commonalities among stakeholders. So we already said diverse, so we could delete the different. And now we're rolling.
I like it.
Ready to move on then? Or are we in agreement that the preamble provides the context needed to understand what the group is doing?
Yeah, I'm good with the preamble part.
Okay.
I'm getting kind of stuck down there where it says elk hunting is a natural resource that funds a high proportion of FWP activities. That sort of implies that the only reason elk are around is to fund the FWP, which I would disagree with.
Yeah, I agree with you, Dan. That one's kind of hanging out there it looks almost like a separate
Yeah.
thing. And I'm not trying to say get rid of it, but maybe try smithing it as another bullet. Or decide not to include it at all.
I think just the beginning part of that sentence is adequate. Working across land ownership is necessary or imperative or something like that. I'd say imperative. If you can't work with the private landowner, you're not going to get very far.
Sarah, could you scroll down on the top one to how we worded that in that document? Because we toyed with that a little bit too. I don't know. Like,
Document here now on the right that you're referring
yes,
to.
yeah, thank you.
I don't know if you want me to scroll further.
Nope, that's perfect.
Okay.
I was going to point out, this is how we reworded that. I don't know how folks like that.
Where is it?
Commonalities.
Yeah,
And I think
I'm fine with that.
so. We said working across land ownerships is imperative, and then Elk are a natural resource held in public trust by FWP for the benefit of all Montanans.
We're going to put federal, state, and private in there. We better put tribal in there somehow too, because somehow or another that has to fit in.
Yeah, I think that's pretty smart too. I agree.
Yeah, that's a good idea, Ed.
And then get rid of this over here on the left.
Yep. Yep.
Updating management plan to reflect current values. Is that a commonality among stakeholders? I mean, I don't understand what we're trying to say there.
My sense is it is. Just that, 2005 was a long time ago. There's been a lot of changes, and it's time to construct a plan that reflects where we are in 2020.
How about putting evolving values in there instead of current? That allows for a little flexibility moving forward. Or just substitute evolving for current. I kind of like it like that.
Hey, Mike, what's your opinion on this? Are we getting into more solutions than issues here?
No, I think I see where this is going. And it may be simpler than what it's stated there, but it seems to me that people agree that the elk management plan needs to be a living document that keeps up with changes in values and I don't know, landscapes, things like that. I've heard people talk about not keeping up with landscapes as well, but it sounds to me like everybody can agree that, this needs to be a document that stays current.
Mike, are we going down the right path of just kind of going down the document here, or do we need to be looking at this more in a broad sense before we start diving into words like this?
I think this is kind of important at this point. One thing you're doing here I haven't seen done before is define the common ground before going into where the conflicts or disagreements are. And so getting this wording right, I think, makes a big difference.
Well, I like that statement as it's presented right now.
How about, how would people feel about a statement like updating the elk management plan to or updating the elk management plan to include or to emphasize adaptive management that reflects the evolving or that reflects changing conditions on the Montana landscape or something like that.
I like that, Dan. I think it's good.
Yep.
So could I ask what the definition of adaptive management is in this context?
Just from my perspective, I would say it's just really, if you have, for example, something like Paradise Valley and there's an issue there that is causing a lot of concern outside of and there's not really a solution within the elk management plan. I think it's probably important for the elk management plan to adapt to those new conditions on the landscape and try to come up with a solution that works for the elk, the landowners, and the sportsmen in that particular spot, even if it isn't specifically discussed in the the original document.
So the IBMP used that phrase, adaptive management, and it let bison out of the park a lot farther than ever before without much worry about public. So I just don't know what, yeah.
I think we're getting into the solutions here too much.
I just sent some suggested changes to Sarah, and she'll put it up there and you can tell me what you think. Again, I'm not putting words into your mouth. I'm trying to reflect what I'm hearing so that if I get it right or we get close, we can move on.
I just have to figure out how to find those things you sent me, Mike.
I sent it in the chat. I sent it in the chat.
Yeah, I don't know how to find my chat. Where is it?
You want me to just say it out loud?
Here, I found it.
Okay.
Okay.
And I agree with Druska, purely from an academic point of view, if nothing else. Adaptive management is a very loaded term.
I don't like it.
I think that's a good change right there.
Yeah, I'd go along with that one.
The updating at the beginning of the phrase is redundant.
Yep. Good change.
Okay, moving on. So next bullet point.
I think we covered that in the very first sentence up at the top. Clear at the top in the preamble part.
So should we take that out? Is that already clear?
I think if we're going to keep it, it should be up in the preamble for the context portion. I don't think it needs to be in this section here.
So where would you move it?
It's already there.
The iconic species.
Yeah.
Yep. I agree. I think that's true.
To me, that's it.
What do you think of that?
Yeah, I'm okay. If we just put which are managed, we don't need the and after history there. Just change that to which.
We good?
I'm good.
Anybody not good? Okay, what about elk incites emotion?
I don't think we need it.
Others?
I think it is a good thing to keep. I mean, if you ever go to a season setting meeting, they're a very emotional topic.
There's no doubt that is true.
It's kind of setting the scene for the next paragraph.
That's the good point, that
There
the
you go.
conflicts are where the emotion is.
There you go. Move it down somehow.
Or even say elk incite emotions in all Montanans.
So a suggestion I'd make there, some people might interpret emotion in a negative way. And, you know, maybe it's a good thing to say, just, you know, elk are deeply valued by all Montanans, or Montanans deeply care about elk populations or something like that.
Not all.
Yeah, I think we ran into some issues with all.
Okay. Many?
Druska, what do you think?
Elk can incite emotion in Montanans. Then you don't have to define how many or who they are.
Yeah, I think that's right, or just leaving it the way it was, but either way is okay. Yeah, because we don't want to define whether it's good or bad.
Okay, so are folks good with that?
Yeah, I'm good.
Anybody opposed to moving on? Okay, so that all of that prior to this point is really good preamble, and it should lead the way to what comes next. And so what comes next is sort of the meat of the issue statement. You can think of this of, I used the example once of an elevator speech, and people, you know, where you lay out the context and then you convince the person you're listening to, here are the problems, so that the person goes, okay, yeah, I see something needs to be done. And I kept getting these really short responses, and then I figured out that people were thinking Montana elevators, not New York City elevators. So this is where you convince the person that's reading this that there are real issues in trying to address stuff in the preamble above. So you're riding along in the elevator and you say there is an issue with the effectiveness of population objective management to elk. And the person in the elevator doesn't necessarily understand elk management. How would you communicate what you're thinking there as this is an issue?
I think there's conflicts more about what the objectives are. Or how they're set.
So disagreement about objectives and how they are set?
Yeah, and when we put that, you know, we were talking about even potentially managing elk on a bull-cow ratio, you know, and we were talking about, is the objective number management even a good policy?
Yeah, because there's disagreement about how the objectives are set, but also I think the enforcement of the objectives that, you know, isn't seems inconsistent as far as, FWP may or may not manage to meet the set objectives.
Yeah, I'm having a problem with the word enforced. I don't know what that means. I mean,
They'd be implemented.
yeah, in our case, there's no way they can get to them. There's no way the FWP can get the population within the objectives under the current system of hunting. It's just not going to happen.
So somewhere in this discussion about objectives, I do believe distribution should be mentioned.
I agree, Justin. Distribution is more of a problem than the objective.
Is that a separate issue?
It could be.
Well, I think that's kind of, we alluded to that on bullet point 2, the concentrations of where those elk are distributed at.
Okay.
Somehow I almost think two and three could be combined.
We talked on that. Some landowners are trying to increase the elk for hunting purposes, and others want the less elk for agricultural purposes.
Good explanation.
Did you want me to add something to the effect of what was just said?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.
Unless somebody else has a concern.
In my opinion, it can't just be private land. Stakeholders like the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service are affecting that distribution as well.
What do folks think about that? I know private and public lands is a ginormous issue when it comes to distribution of elk. Does that get at what you are thinking about, or did we just change the meaning of that sentence?
I've got a question for Kevin. Are you referring to inaccessible or unhuntable land on the refuge?
Yeah, that's part of the problem. There's also management issues with their natural resource being the forage and such also.
Sorry, I might have missed the beginning of that conversation, but I think concentrations, distributions, and behavior of elk might encompass a little bit more, because one of the issues is the loss of migratory behavior.
Do you want to call it migratory behavior or just behavior in general?
Well, what do you think, Druska? I mean, the activities of elk on private, what elk are doing when they're in places is also part of elk behavior, I guess, so.
I mean, migratory sounds good at home, but that's a small speck in Montana.
I wonder about how much this bullet point has changed from what it originally was. I mean, I guess I was under the assumption the issue was that kind of born was the original factor in the shoulder season entirety was concentration of elk on private land.
Yeah, that's right. I helped develop that proposal. We're very, very early discussions of that proposal, so that is correct.
And I just wonder, yeah, if has this bullet point taken on an entirely new meaning, and if it is, that's fine. But I think it's totally different from what it originally was intended.
Then if we don't want to include any other land but private, then it should just say elk on private land instead of on or near.
Basically, from my point of view, any large concentration of elk has the potential to be problematic, no matter where it's at.
But it could be 12 and it's distribution. So they're in the wrong place.
And Druska, I think we put on or near was the idea was that, you know, those elk might be on private land during the night and then be off during the day, or
okay,
on during the night and off during the day. That was our logic.
Gotcha.
I'm kind of hearing a couple of different issues in this one statement, and maybe it would just be a good exercise to try and split this out to see if we can come up with or tease apart what these other issues are. One I'm hearing is, you know, maybe it's a distribution issue from, you know, public lands to private lands. One issue I'm hearing about are sort of that issue of concentrations, you know, sort of unhealthy or whatever it is, concentrations of elk on private land. Behavior kind of resonates behind all of that, but maybe it'd just be a good exercise to talk about them separately when we can combine them later again. But I just hear a couple of different issues behind the scenes.
Once again, Carrie, I defer facilitation to you. That is exactly ahead of what I was going to suggest. Let's try this. Sarah, I just sent you some text. Okay. Now let's put some sub bullets underneath that. Okay, there are different notions of what is acceptable according to different stakeholders, correct? So like Carrie was suggesting, if we were going to tease them out, all right, for example, what would be acceptable to a landowner?
As far as an acceptable concentration?
Well, concentration, distribution, or behavior.
I'd like them to stay spread out over a larger area and stay up on the public land, but that's impossible.
Well, let's not deal with impossible yet. We're just saying what is acceptable.
A lot of it depends on time of year.
Okay.
And that'll vary from landowner to landowner as well.
Right.
Well, or if it's probably not as big a worry if you're not anywhere where there's diseased wildlife. But if you have them during the critical abortive time period, you don't want them at all.
Okay, so I'm just throwing spaghetti at the wall to illustrate what I'm talking about. So Sarah, let's go with separation from livestock during calving in the DSA or something like that. Does that get at what you're talking about, Druska?
You could just say during critical abortive time period and
Okay.
everybody knows it.
Yeah, and I think FWP actually has a definition of that hot zone, which is, I can't remember, Druska would know better than me, but like Jan 1 to June 15th or something. I don't remember what the dates are, but.
Right. It is that big a period, but I think it's most important in March, April, May.
So let's just get rid of calving in. Okay.
Yep.
What's another acceptable You know, so we've captured what's an acceptable concentration distribution behavior for a landowner. What's another one?
Widely distributed elk on public lands.
Okay, why, so, all right, let's hold on. I got a question about that, but let's keep going.
Our private landowners don't like them on their land during haying season.
Okay,
or they want minimal amount during haying season.
what do folks think about that?
What can you help me understand the rationale behind that?
Elk eat a lot of hay and they're pretty destructive, especially when they do start haying. They tear up the windrows, everything else in this part of the country.
Okay, thank you.
They will actually move off of public lands to hit the alfalfa fields.
Well, and if we remember the example that was given in Idaho where the elk started moving into the cornfields and how destructive they were, I think there was a huge price tag on that claim, if I remember correctly.
Yep, 1.1 million, I think he said.
Yeah.
Over a million.
Yeah, and we've already dealt, I mean, like the department, it's been a few years, but they, at one time with, you know, cornfields east of Billings was having to go in pretty much harvest elk or try to figure out how to get elk out of cornfields in the middle of the night. So it's happening here
So
too.
it's not just haying, it's agricultural harvest, basically. Or
Growing
we're gonna make it more general than haying.
Or growing season.
Can I just lend some perspective to this, just as a historical thing? The first jury trial in Broadwater County was in the early 1900s, and it was regarding a illegal kill by a homesteader where the elk were wiping out his grain field. So that was the first trial in the Broadwater County Courthouse, and it resulted in the first damage hunt right after the first of the year there, which was implemented by
So
the Game Commission.
what do we want to do with that sentence if you want to keep it in there? Because what I suggested looks like it boogered it up. What's a better way of saying it?
Is there a way to encompass just a statement that elk impacts on agricultural production?
Well, we want to say what the concern is. All right, so we talk about there are conflicts among stakeholders, and so we're talking about what is the conflict.
It varies with the agricultural operation. For us, it's feeding fall pasture for cows, grazing off spring turnout for cows, getting in the haystacks. So,
okay, so what's a more general way of saying that, rather than just haying season?
there's negative elk impacts on agricultural production.
I think that is a good sentence.
I do too.
You want to go with Sarah's suggestion?
I like it.
And then I'm going to kill this one.
No. Oh, yeah. Wait. Yes, sorry.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay, what else? What do other stakeholders, what are their concerns about acceptable concentrations, distributions, and behavior?
From a sportsman perspective, inaccessible elk.
So can you be more specific about what you mean by inaccessible? Because that might be to somebody that they're fencing them off.
Concentrations of that are being encouraged to reside on a private landscape with no public access.
I would add to that also just landlocked public land.
Does that get at what you were talking about?
Yes.
I like it.
Okay, next one. What's another stakeholder perspective on acceptable concentrations, distributions, and behavior?
Hey, Mike, this is Marcus.
Yeah.
Sorry, this just popped into my head as we were working on point number 4. We're going to probably need to go back and address this, but we keep using the term sportsman, and that's pretty gender specific. So at some point, we might need to go back through and make that more gender neutral, because there's a lot more than men out there hunting. I just want to make sure we represent that.
Okay, good point. That's let's hold on to that. When we go back and do finer scale editing, we'll need to make that change.
Yep, absolutely. Just wanted to flag it now.
Yeah,
I mean,
good, thanks.
We're talking about hunters. So, I mean, it's not, I can't think of any other sporting interests we're talking about, are there? Can we just replace that with hunters?
This is Ed. From a fine tuning perspective, at some point we need to revisit the wording of that follows the number 2 there. We're labeling these as acceptable concentrations when we're actually detailing something that's more unacceptable. So let's, we can just leave that alone, talk about it later or whatever.
Well, so I think it's important these really should display the conflicts. And so you might have somebody that thinks widely distributed elk on public lands is great. And then you'll have other stakeholders that say that's not great. And so it's important to capture all of those perspectives here, even if we don't agree with them.
Yeah, just so we're not.
I think one of the challenges in articulating is that I don't think anybody there's not a whole lot of people, I should say, that are going to disagree that we want to minimize impacts to agricultural production, and we want access to public wildlife on publicly accessible lands. But the challenge is when in the interaction of those, and it speaks to how those elk are managed within those units. When the perceptions are that there's too many elk in an area because of their impact to ag operations, at the same time they're being concentrated in some of those locations. So the frustrations are from one side are that there's a war on elk because there's an 8-month season, and they're being pushed off of public lands early and not very accessible. At the same time, there's frustration on the other side of the fence when there's crop damage and disease concerns. So I think the challenge is basically in trying to encompass that what creates the conflict is the interplay of all these issues.
Well said, Casey. I agree completely. So if it isn't evident reading through these that they are conflicting with each other, then we're not making a good case for conflict. So item number 5 there. Is there another stakeholder perspective on concentration, distribution, and behavior that should be captured?
You have disease set in whenever the concentration gets too great.
I'm sorry, could you say that again, Pat?
You end up with more likelihood of disease whenever the herds get too big.
What do folks think of that?
I don't know. I wonder if we maybe just need to change that to, I mean, I like that we're considering disease, but maybe instead of like too large or too concentrated, it could say something like disease is a concern when herds are concentrated, or I don't know, something like that.
Is this really a disagreement?
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm not sure this is a conflict. Isn't that something we kind of all agree on? Would be up here maybe?
I would
think it's more of a
second or third or
result.
fourth that. I think there's a general agreement amongst the folks that I interact with that disease is a problem. So I agree. I think that's something we all recognize as a problem.
Does that capture it?
Yeah.
I think it might be worthwhile, given what I've heard from the group, to, talk about chronic wasting disease and brucellosis. They're both diseases, but they're two different management concerns.
Yeah, I would say concerns about disease in both wildlife and livestock. And you could say concerns about wildlife disease or wildlife spreading disease.
Put TB in there too. We got corrected on that this morning.
One.
TB, yeah.
TB, yeah.
It should be a BTB, a small b. Yeah, I just want to make sure that when the disease people read this, they don't flip out, because tuberculosis, that kind of tuberculosis is not as transmissible to humans. It's bovine tuberculosis. It's a big deal for livestock, but anyway, I think you know what I mean.
So maybe instead
and
of B, why don't you say bovine TB? Because I wouldn't have known that, and that's a good distinction.
And I don't think we need the spreading to and from livestock, because I think all three of those are not good for elk. And I don't know that the concern about livestock is really a commonality. And it's more,
Yeah, we do have that down on the disagreements, which might be the best place for it.
I agree that we want a healthy, the commonality maybe is that we want a healthy elk population. And then, I don't know. And I don't know that that's really, the concerns about disease aren't a conflict either. I don't know.
My sense is that just in my experience, it's been that the disease, that there's a commonality, at least in people that are looking at the elk issues and concern over disease. Where the conflict arises is how do we go about stopping the spread of disease, say from elk to livestock, and what sort of measures do we support to do that?
And we covered that on under 2 on point number 1.
You guys like the concerns about disease where it is?
Yeah, I'm fine with it up there.
And I think if you look on the right side of the screen, you look at subpoint 3 under 2B, effective the new plan should address. That's a pretty good discussion, I think, of what we were talking about. Maybe not.
So should we put that somewhere under, if you go over to the document on the left, where we're talking about conflicts, does the brucellosis and its impact on the health of people, livestock, and wildlife herds belong in there somewhere?
You're talking about putting it where now?
For example, Sarah, can you copy that?
The
7.3.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got that ready to go.
Just for fun, let's put it under, let's make a bullet 5 underneath inaccessible. No, up.
There you go.
Okay. Now, I don't know if it belongs there or not.
I think it's more the implementation measures that we use to mitigate disease risk between wildlife and domestic livestock. That seems to be where the conflict arises.
Yeah, I agree. I think it needs to go under 5.
So what if 3ABC substituted on the left for number 5?
I think that's okay. I agree with that.
Yeah, it all fits together.
And I like the sentence on number 3 better than the one on 5. The how to effectively implement measures, not to how to, but effectively implement measures to mitigate.
Instead of this one over here that I've got highlighted.
Maybe it said the same thing. Maybe I'm just getting blind this late in the day.
So here was what it was.
Yeah, thank you.
So do we have anything to put in number 5 under conflicts about concentrations, et cetera? Is there another stakeholder perspective that needs to be there?
Allie mentioned the non-consumptive.
So what might represent that perspective?
I don't know if maybe number 2 that's already on there would kind of encompass that already.
Okay. Any other stakeholder perspectives?
Well, I think one thing that we've spent a lot of time talking about is disease, but the other type of hunts that could be somewhat controversial are when we do game damage hunts and elk management unit, management hunts that are based on depredation and how we go about allocating the hunters. Do we use the list or what have you? And that has that's pretty detailed, but it's consistently been a conflict in my experience.
That capture it?
I guess I would look to the sportsmen and the landowners to see what they think, and maybe that's dropped off a fair bit since the shoulder seasons, but prior to shoulder seasons, that was it took a lot of time of the commission and department and local biologists.
Yeah, Dan, I think there's some conflict, especially I saw recently in Region 4, where I think there was some inconsistency on how those game damage hunt were occurring. Whether it was a kill permit, there was a lack of transparency in several instances.
Yeah, I really don't know what goes on there. It seemed like with the game damage hunt, FWP picked the hunters, and like with the shoulder season, it's more the hunters come to us, or if we choose the FWP facilitator. They're not chosen from a list.
So yeah, that's what I mean. I think, you know, for the most part, I think they're supposed to be put in for a hunt roster. And I think you're supposed to be randomly selected, you know, to participate in a game damage hunt. And then other times you see, you know, just kill permits issued to the rancher, or just the season extended recently.
Well, and I think there's a new stat, or there was some sort of memo that Jeff Hagner put out back 5 or 6 years ago, which authorized the landowners to actually to select up to 15 or 20% of their hunters in a game damage hunt, because, you know, they were having problems. They had a game damage hunt in Madison. They called the people in Kalispell, and by the time the guys from Kalispell got there, the elk were gone. So the department added some flexibility to allow people, the landowners, to get hunters on the ground more quickly.
That's right. I remember.
Well, the department, in the presentation yesterday, he said the department has the 4 options of and I think these are allowed by statute: the game damage hunt, the management hunt, the supplemental game damage, or the elk management removal. There's the 4 options, and I think those are available in any district. Maybe that's where the confusion is.
So I don't have a ton of information on the game damage program, and Jason was on yesterday, but I don't think he's on today. What I can say is that you are correct in that, yes, we have hunt rosters, but also, yes, the landowner can select up to a certain percentage, and that percentage varies based on the type of hunt that's going on. If there's antlered animals that are allowed to be taken, then the landowner cannot select any hunters. But any more details on that, and we'd probably have to ask, you know, maybe either Ken, or if Jason is around, I can see if he is available to answer any more specific questions on that.
Yeah, this is Ken. You got it right. So the starting right, like Dan said, about 6 years ago, the for the traditional game management or game damage hunt, a landowner can select, I think, up to 25% of the hunters, and the rest come off that roster.
So is that bullet in there sufficient allocation of game damage hunt opportunity, or do you want to expand on that?
I don't really see the importance of it, really. I mean, it seems like the FWP has quite a bit of flexibility, and the landowners have a need for some real-time action. Well, so I'm kind of okay with it the way it is. I don't.
Are you saying we should take it out, Ed, or just find the way it is?
I don't know if we need to be taking a lot of time to talk about it. It seems like we're getting pretty specific here on one little management potential action. So I don't know if we needed it in this document myself. Other people might have a different opinion.
What about, maybe it's more a question of the consistency of how it's applied. Maybe that's, I don't know, does that fit in with what was being said? That it wasn't consistent?
I'd say fair and effective allocation would capture both sides of that.
So fair and effective allocation. Let's take a look at that.
I think that's good, because I think from the landowner's perspective, just a straight, just straight off the list was causing them some challenges. And with a 25%, that they can call and the other comes off the list, seems to me that it does, it deals with that. So, yeah.
Okay.
Well, it seems like damage hunts have more or less, I mean, they're pretty scarce anymore. So is the issue more that what we have, or is it that shoulder seasons, like a shoulder season versus damage hunt conflict?
In our case, the damage hunt wasn't something that would work because the elk would pull back. So we needed something a little bit broader in scope so that we could disperse hunters over a larger area. You know, that they were not just standing around the hayfield, they're pulling back several miles. So to us, at least, the shoulder season concept is much more palatable than damage hunt, which implies to me, at least, that they all can just stand around chasing.
So in the DSA, they use those elk management removals, and they can be used till April. Just an FYI.
Okay, for now, are we good with fair and effective allocation?
Yep.
Okay. Sarah, could you hit enter a couple times? Let's look at 1 through 5 there. And everybody has their own perspective, their own values. Look at, okay, in terms of conflicts and concentrations, distributions, and behavior of elk, do you see yourself in there? What you think, what you value? Is there anything that's missing from your point of view when it comes to conflicts and concentrations?
Sorry, Mike, I'm still a little hung up on number 5. What exactly is the issue there? Is it so that tags are being, or people are given an opportunity unfairly on private lands for game damage hunts?
Joel, I think a lot of the issue is that Druska mentioned, that it's been inconsistent in how those game damage hunts have been executed.
I think that's right too. I agree with that. Maybe it doesn't need to be in there because it doesn't seem to fit as well with the other 4 bullet points after Mike has to take a look at it like that.
Then I do think that is probably that's way less important than their other 4. I wonder if it needs to be in there.
Yeah, I don't think it does.
Okay, well, let's take it out for now, and we can always put it back in or insert it elsewhere, okay? So going back to my question, look at those 4 conflicts and concentration, distribution, and behavior. Do you see your perspective represented?
Yes.
Yes.
Is there anybody who feels like their perspective is not represented?
I feel fully represented. I don't feel that there is representation in this group of my polar opposite. Does that need to be addressed?
I think that would be appropriate.
Okay, so let's say there's a landowner that bought a ranch. He's got agricultural interest. Well, he's got ag fields and pivots, and he wants elk on his land, or she. I don't even know how to word it because it's not who I am, but I see it out on the landscape quite often.
I don't think you can do anything about it. That's a property right. What they choose to do with it is their business.
I agree 100%, but I don't feel that they are represented. If they were here, I feel they would have something to say.
I agree with that, Mark. I think there is, you talk about changing landowners, but there are landowners that would like to see a far higher concentration of elk across the landscape or across the unit, and they haven't been represented.
I disagree. They're represented in number 3. We're not saying which way the concentration should go. It could be greater or lower. We're making no judgment on which way that arrow is pointing up or
Are you guys referring to not just ag though, to private landowners like selling hunts that would want to do that?
Not necessarily selling the hunts. And without telling stories, it's hard to explain, but just having an individual or a landowner with the sole intent of farming their land with no cattle in mind or agriculture, just to lure, attract, and keep elk, and in doing so, changing migration patterns and where elk are located permanently on the landscape. It's a false redistribution of the resource.
How
And
about
they
something?
have the right to do it. And I see it as a
How about just something like some landowners value the concentration of elk on their
can of
property?
worms to even have on here.
I'm sorry, Mark, I spoke all over you. What were you saying?
My internet, I think, is cutting it out. I said maybe it's too big of a can of worms to even put in here.
I don't think it is. I mean, you have people out there that like to look out their windows and see a Serengeti. And so I think there are people that value the concentration of elk on their property.
That's true. I don't see how that's a conflict necessarily, though. I mean, if they want to do that, that's fine. But how's that a conflict to those people that want to do that?
It comes when you manage for objectives within those districts, particularly on large landowners that have large quantities of elk, in some cases more than the entire district.
Yep. So we've
And
captured that under the other. Oh, sorry,
Right.
Casey.
Manage them with maximum hunts to reduce populations, but you can't get there. So that's the conflict. I mean, I think there are amenity landowners that would prefer that are managing their own elk herds with de facto private management of them.
Yeah, I think the conflict isn't necessarily within number 5, but it's between number 5 and number 4 or something like that. So capturing the fact that there are landowners out there that are happy to have elk concentrated on their place, you know, that is something that is directly in opposition to some of the other values that are being expressed here. Does that make sense?
I don't think it's a separate item. I think it's captured in everything else, really. I mean,
still disagree.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, I still disagree. I think in this whole paragraph up here that starts with there are conflicts among stakeholders regarding management prescriptions. So I think if we just leave number 5 out of there and skip right down to our number 3, again, I say we're not saying which way that concentration or this distribution arrow is going.
Okay.
So one guy might like a lot of them, one guy might not like any. So that right there defines the conflict.
Okay.
We need them for 5.
So Mark, we were just trying to get at the point you raised. And by the way, I appreciate you talking about polar opposites, because, you know, it is a good idea to try to represent people that may not be here to represent themselves, because if they don't see that in this document, then, you know, I think they might really be upset. So anyway, Mark, what do you think? You're the one that brought it up.
I more or less wanted the group's thoughts. And I don't know how much I'm allowed to go to the public. I have somewhat of a relationship, or not a relationship. I've seen them and I've talked to them in the past. I would be glad to get their opinion moving forward, but I feel they create more of a problem than a solution. And I'm fine leaving it out of this actual bullet point. I
So
just,
to Mark, oh, go ahead.
nope, you go ahead.
Well, to your point, I think what happens with these landowners that are doing exactly what you said is that they artificially congregate elk on their land, which, you know, they move around some. So you're attracting a larger group, which then affects your neighbor who maybe has cattle, or, you know, you've landlocked it so hunters can't get in, or you actually have enough elk that you have concentrated there that it's a disease risk.
And I would like to say that I do think this is kind of talking about what number 4 is, you know, differing landowner interest regarding the wildlife.
Okay. So
maybe it's a bullet point there.
Just to move it along, let's get rid of 5, Sarah. And 3 is basically what we've got up above. Is that correct? 3 is now captured in 2?
Yes.
Okay.
I think there is a stakeholder that we don't have represented in our group too, and that's the commercial interests. And I'm not saying we need to add something here, but it's something I'm just reflecting on.
I'd like to see number 3 just strike everything, strike on private land.
Yeah, I don't think that's a bad idea, Kevin. I mean,
Do we need to go back and visit what Casey was referring to with the people not included?
Yeah, so I'd like to do that. What would be the perspective of outfitters or guides or whomever you were talking about, Casey, when it comes to concentrations, distributions, and behavior?
Dan, do you think you could speak to that?
Yeah, I could just, I mean, if you wanted to put down number 5, you could say the role commercialization potentially plays in the the problematic concentration or distribution of elk.
You could have summed that up by saying harboring.
Ever since I got taken to woodshed for that word, I don't use it anymore.
I agree, Dan. Bad word.
So Casey, do you think that captures what you were thinking?
It does for me, but if I'm an outfitter, I'm not sure what I think of it. I guess I just.
Yeah, would an outfitter want problematic in there? I would think probably not. Because they might see concentration as a good thing.
Yeah, and you could say that role of commercialization potentially plays in elk distribution.
What do you think? Okay. Who's ready for a break? Want to take a 10-minute break?
Sure.
Let's reconvene at 2:25. Sarah, are you back with us?
I am.
Hi there. Let's go back to where we were with your screen sharing.
Okay.
Okay, if we're ready to get back rolling, there's some folks that haven't heard a whole lot from, so I'm gonna call you out and see what you think about what we've got so far. Ren, can I start with you?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
No, my computer's been acting up. I guess I'd, be fully forthcoming. I'm a partner in an outfitting business as well as a landowner and all this stuff. So I am a bit concerned with all of this, but we'll handle that a different day. So I'm a big the way I feel is that it's an individual right, and I have a right to my land and a right to run my business, if so be, if the business is sustainable. And for Fish, Wildlife and Parks to have the overlapping hands to come in and say that that's not correct on private land tends to rub me the wrong way. So
okay.
Where do you see that stated there, Ren?
I guess I'm not sure where the number 5 just saying, the role commercialization potentially plays in elk distribution. Obviously we're commercialized, but so is every other person in the world that wants.
Well, so Ren, what I think we're trying to do there is not poke a finger at outfitters, but try to capture their perspective on concentrations, distributions, and behavior of elk. Okay, so if you particularly as an outfitter, if you see something that does within that list 1 through 5 there that doesn't represent your perspective, what would that perspective be? That would belong in number 5.
Yeah, I guess I don't know what the right answer is on my end. I just don't want to create a closed gate per se to where they come back at us in 3 years and say that, well, you guys agreed to this on the elk management plan, and that's why we're moving forward with it. So that's what I'm trying to traverse right now.
Okay, well, right now you're not agreeing to anything.
Mike, can I add something there?
Of course.
I was thinking about this on our break, but I think we need to be, not that we're already not thinking about it, but given where we're at in state politics, when we started talking about this, I think that we want to ensure that our language represents all interests and is neutral in our language, so that everybody could see their own interests are here. So things, I think this might be a little bit loaded. I think we'd be better off saying something like, commercial interests in elk distribution or something like that, rather than saying commercialization or something like that.
Okay. I agree with you. There should be nothing loaded here. This should be a good faith representation of what stakeholders think. All right. So no judgment whatsoever. And I guess the thing I'm kind of searching for here is, outfitters are stakeholders in elk management. And so do they have any particular values or perspectives on how elk are concentrated, distributed, or how they behave? And we should try to capture those. So Ren, have you got any thoughts?
I'm I'm good with keeping it very normalized on there. That obviously it does play a role. I guess the other thing I want everybody to understand that from my little point of the side of the world down here, we're not competing with public land people in our outfitting because we're leasing private lands. So I think in the greater state of Montana, there's a difference from where we are, in my opinion, versus others. So I would like to say that I don't want to create an issue there, but obviously the
No, you're not creating an issue at all, Ren. Not creating an issue at all. In a perfect world, what would an outfitter like to see in terms of how elk are concentrated or distributed? What's your opinion about what would make for something outfitters would like to see? Or is that even such a thing?
Yeah, I think it's definitely such a thing. In my opinion, in a lot of this, additional tags would help that, and I think that helps all your public land hunters as well. Because then if we have 2 tags essentially, and we have 100 head of elk, we're not going to ever. They're going to still continue to feel secure on our piece of property.
Okay, can you tie that to how elk are distributed? So I heard that tags can be something that outfitters would value, but I'm not sure how that ties to elk distribution or concentration.
Hey guys, can I make a suggestion? What if we got rid of sub 0.5 and you just went down to number 3 below that and said differing landowner interests regarding wildlife and how landowner decisions may affect elk distribution? And you just keep commercialization out completely? I don't know.
I don't have any problem with that, as long as the group doesn't feel like outfitters have a particular view on concentrations, distributions, and behavior of elk that isn't already captured in 1 through 4.
On my end of it, I think Casey's probably exactly right, because at the end of the day, in a lot of Montana, the outfitters are competing on some of the same public land. And in my area, it all depends on the landowner. And so obviously, some of my landowners have different interests from other ones. And so I think we would fall under that category.
Okay, so would you say get rid of 5? That Sarah has highlighted?
I feel obviously there's a big market in Montana for outfitters, so I don't know that we completely get rid of it. I'm speaking more, obviously, very selfish on my behalf, on my little corner of the world in southeastern Montana. So
you're not being selfish, Ren. You're being honest. Okay, what we want is to make sure that if an outfitter looks at this, will he or she say, "Yep, they captured my perspective"?
In my opinion, I think at the very least we need to, commercialization is kind of it has a lot of negative connotations with it. So I do like Casey's suggestion to change it from commercialization to commercial use or something like that.
Okay. How's that look to you, Ren?
Good to me.
Okay. Someone else we haven't heard from yet is Everett. What are you thinking?
I've just kind of been listening as things go along, and when I get to say something, somebody's already piped up and put my thoughts in for me. So I think it's shaping out really well. I'm liking the organization that we've got, and I think we're hitting the highlights that we need to. So I'm pretty happy. So
Okay, comfortable with where we are then?
yeah, I think so.
Okay. Druska, any thoughts?
Nope, I'm good.
Okay. Marcus? Marcus, are you multitasking?
I just about to get a high score here. Come on. No. No, I think at this point we're hitting all the right elements. So I'm good for now.
Okay. Okay, well, we don't have to get it perfect on this try. We'll have a chance to come back and edit or add or subtract as we see fit. But let's go ahead and move on from number 2 there. We've got number 3, differing landowner interests regarding public wildlife. So help me understand how that's a conflict.
I think it ties back to the different landowners and the evolving interests that newer landowners in the state of Montana have, you know, whether they want a bunch of elk on their property or whether they're agricultural focused landowners.
So would it be more specific to talk about regarding distribution and concentrations of elk?
Just a question for clarification for this number 3 here, differing landowner interests. Am I reading it right or interpreting it right, assuming that people are referencing private landowner interests, not public landowners?
I think it's both, but
Is this one also just repeating number 2 then?
That's a good question.
I think if it stays, it could possibly be number 6 under heading 2.
I think that's right, actually, because it didn't look like we had it up there before, or we didn't say it explicitly.
What do folks think of that? Moving on. Okay, so the new number 3 is implementing measures to mitigate disease risk, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
I think we covered that one pretty good.
I think number 3 looks good, except for maybe the sub point of number 3. Do we want to expand on that?
Should be TB. Ken corrected us on that this morning.
Or even maybe a question for some of the FWP folks on the call is, are we worried about hoof rot potentially coming into Western Montana?
FWP is multitasking.
No,
I think
I'm
we've
listening.
had it before, and I know didn't we have it in the Madison quite a few years ago?
I don't know. You'd have to ask maybe Justin Goody if he's still on, if he knows.
I would question.
I am on, sorry, I'm on a call here. So I'm dealing with other stuff too. I missed the question.
Oh, this is just Danver, but we were just talking about hoof rot and whether that was a concern of the department or whether it had been found in Montana before.
It has not been found in Montana, but it is a big concern in all the northwestern states. So we're coordinating with Idaho, Washington, Oregon on surveillance because it will get here. It is something we are concerned about.
And
So
I
maybe
think
this
when,
is,
The other one that I was going to bring up before, but now that you're on it, it seems more appropriate, is that anthrax, where we have had repeated anthrax outbreaks, and the elk have been in the middle of that. We've been working on it since the last outbreak here in Southwest Montana about 5 years ago, which was on Flying D Ranch. And it happens periodically in eastern Montana as well.
Can elk get blue tongue?
You know, I've never heard of that. I've never heard of that being an issue with blue tongue or EHD with elk. It's blue tongue shows up in pronghorn sometimes, but both of those are mostly in white-tailed deer and sometimes mule deer.
All right. Thank you.
I think
Is this something that we need to, break down every potential disease, or is this something that we can maybe list CWD, brucellosis, and others without actual sub bullet point for each?
Yeah, I would. I mean, this is you guys' document, but I think you're right because I don't think we can foresee all of the ones that are coming. And I think you've got it stated correctly in the number 3 above. And that's the way we talk about it within the health program, is mitigating diseases between wildlife, livestock, and people. And so we've got a process every year where we prioritize diseases based on set criteria. And that's how we determine what we are doing surveillance for and everything else. So as things change, we're sort of set up to be agile in that sense. So I'm not sure it's necessary to list every disease, but as long as you capture CWD and brucellosis, I think with regards to elk, those are the ones that are going to take up most of our time, at least in the foreseeable future.
Maybe we ought to just go back to other then.
Yeah, or just say including CWD, brucellosis, and others.
so Sarah, I think it's hoof rot, which is just a 1-0. Yeah, I think that looks better. I mean,
and just to sort of put my nerdy biologist hat on, it's actually elk hoof rot. And among biologists, there's a kind of a distinction just because there's other types of hoof rot that affect different animals.
Good
and it's
That
a
was a nerd.
different cause.
Ruska,
And I
that was
think-
one of the finest acts of diplomacy I have ever seen. Okay, should we move on to number 4 there? We're back to talking about conflicts among stakeholders, about management prescriptions. So does that one capture what you're thinking?
I wonder if it should say differing definitions of hunting, of quality hunt opportunity or quality hunting opportunity.
If we wanted to be more specific there, I think it's possible to say something to the extent of maintaining over-the-counter hunting opportunity while ensuring, I mean, that's the balance. The conflict is essentially people want to have over-the-counter tags and liberal seasons. And there's others that would prefer to manage trophy opportunities and would be willing to accept less opportunity as a trade-off.
Is that what you're talking about, Casey? What Sarah has there?
Yeah, I guess I was just trying to articulate it a little better so that it was more understandable what that conflict is.
Well,
so it's not differing definitions of opportunity. It's that opportunities in some ways in conflict with, well, I mean,
I think I hear you saying there's a trade-off between
structures. Go ahead.
No, you go. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
I was just trying to wrestle with how you communicate it. If you got a better idea, give her a shot.
Well, do I hear you correctly? You're talking about there's a trade-off between hunting opportunity and quality hunts. However you define.
Yeah,
that.
I mean, so we in Montana have probably the best or the liberal opportunity for resident hunters, and every season you're guaranteed a low cost tag that allows you to hunt for 11 weeks with a bow and a rifle, in across most of the state. And there are exceptions, you know, there's permit opportunities, but there are other people like heard somebody was articulating the idea of a 6-point or better system, and that would be another approach, right? So maximizing opportunity comes at a cost. It means you have more people in the field, and you tend to have fewer big bulls.
I guess I would add something there. It seemed like when we were talking about that earlier, we were talking more in terms of people saying that their quality of hunt was diminished just by the overcrowding of people. That was kind of the perspective that we were coming from earlier. For not, instead of the trophy hunt being the definition of quality, it was just the overcrowding of people, days of use, whatever you want to call it.
The other thing that was mentioned was, you know, you may have hiked 2 miles to get to place X, but the hunting opportunity there was really crummy because there were no animals. So you might have had a great walk, but hunting was poor. So measuring that, or anyway, dealing with that discrepancy in that, yeah.
My perspective is overcrowding, basically. That's what I think is an issue. There's just a ton of people out for a very long time. So the number of people afield on any given day is pretty large.
Well, and I wonder if we're tying it back into elk management, if we should finish that sentence off after the parentheses by saying, and how it affects elk distribution.
And I guess kind of coming back to that sense of distribution and thinking about other voices that might need representation, we certainly have other folks out on the landscape recreating that may affect the distribution of elk.
So number 4 is getting very complex. And that makes me wonder if it needs to be simplified, or if we need to do like we did with number 2 and 3 and have sub bullets that specify what we mean. So you could have something like number 3 is conflicts between hunting opportunity and hunt quality, and then sub bullets below that. Or do you just want to simplify number 4?
This might be unpopular, but I think we need the sub bullets because it's a complex topic.
I agree. We may end up lumping some of it later, but I think it'll help us figure out the real issue.
What was it, the conflicts between hunting opportunity and?
How it affects distribution, and then have a series of points under that.
Was it conflict between opportunity and quality?
Quality.
Okay. So what would the sub bullets be?
I don't know how we say this effectively, but the idea that access does not equal opportunity. So although we may be granted access to hunt either public land or private land, that doesn't mean we have opportunity to hunt elk. I'm not doing a good job of articulating this, but I think that's part of this discussion.
Is it opportunity though, or the quality? Because really you're having the opportunity to hunt. It's just that the quality of that hunt is poor.
Yeah, I think we're trying to relate the two, and like Marcus said earlier, it's some people might call it a hunt, but others might call it just a walk in the park or walk in the trees.
So maybe to be more explicit, instead of conflict between hunting opportunity and quality, we could say trade-offs or trade-off, or.
Yeah, that's true. Marcus, is your comment centered around access and the trade-offs with elk security?
Casey, could you say that again? I missed a lot of that.
What you were getting at was the trade-off between easy access to elk habitat and what you lose in elk security. And I guess the resulting movement of elk out of those places that are easily accessed.
Yeah, I guess I was more so meaning that there's a lot of quality access that isn't necessarily quality elk habitat. So what we're talking about, sure, I have access to the spot. I can go hunt here, but there aren't going to be any elk. So I don't really have an elk hunting opportunity, if that makes sense.
Well, I've heard opportunity discussed before, and so a question for the group: does opportunity mean an opportunity to hunt, or does it mean an opportunity to harvest?
So when I think of opportunity, I think of I'm going to an area where I may have the opportunity to engage with elk in the hunting experience. That doesn't mean, like, nobody can guarantee that I'm going to get a shot at anything. But if I go hunt in a specific area, I want there to be a reasonable assurance that this is elk country and there's going to be elk in this area. Obviously, they're going to migrate around. Obviously, weather, and there's all kinds of factors. But I'm trying not to share examples, but there's an area where the biologist flat out said, don't go archery elk hunt here because they're just not here during this time. So in that case, I have access, but I don't really have opportunity.
And Mike, so it means both. So then the other opportunity is also in tags. And maybe that gets to more like the management tools of season structure and length.
So tags give you an opportunity to hunt, right?
Yeah, makes it legal for you to go to pursue one any given season. And in Montana, everybody that wants to pony up $20 can hunt an elk every year.
Right.
To me, opportunity equals opportunity to buy a tag.
I'd agree with these folks, and like kind of what Dreska said earlier, that that it's more the quality than the opportunity that's kind of lacking there.
Well, and I think the other way to think about quality is if your goal is to manage down to a particular number, the higher quality of hunt, enjoyed by a larger number of people, the more elk that are going to get harvested and the better FWP will be in succeeding in reaching its population objectives.
Okay, can I make a suggestion based on what I'm hearing? Sarah, go to under number 4, hit enter a couple times. Let's create some space in there. No, up under 4. There you go. You want to have widespread opportunities to hunt, right? And then one below that, you want quality hunts. And we can put in parentheses for now, trophy bulls, number of encounters, whatever other things people define, a lack of crowding. Okay. So number 1 is about everybody can buy a tag and go everywhere, so that as many people that want to hunt can hunt in as many places as they want. And there's a trade-off with the quality of the hunts, where that could have an effect on trophy bulls, number of encounters with animals when you go out, and lack of crowding. So that's throwing spaghetti at the wall. Is that what you're talking about? Is that what you're getting at?
Yeah, I think so, Mike. I mean, when I first put that in there, I was thinking you could say you have a parcel of land that will have elk there, probably 9 months out of the year, but everyone and their dog has an opportunity to drive their vehicle up to it and hunt that area, and it doesn't take long for that parcel of land to present zero opportunity at hunting elk.
Mm-hmm.
So the access is good there, and the quality would be good if you could somehow not allow 20 people a day to hunt that particular area.
Mm-hmm. Other thoughts?
I'm trying to think of a way to articulate sort of the quality is such and I think Mike, you gave some good examples of how one might define quality, and what I heard was some way to express how, while there may be a license and there may be land available to pursue elk on, the landscape itself just is not going to hold elk. And maybe as sort of an analogy, like you're not going to enroll some land or engage some land in sort of the upland bird habitat enhancement program and go and hunt an area in an expectation if there's really zero value in the landscape to hold upland game birds. So I guess I don't know if that is a workable analogy or not, but just having an area that allows for the opportunity for elk to be present. And that's, again, going back to quality habitat, which is defined in 100 different ways. So it may not have been helpful there.
No, I think I see what you're saying. But before I say what I think you're saying, what do other people think?
I think we're getting in the weeds too much and dissecting it over and over and over. I think Montana as a whole has several permit regulated areas where the trophy quality and opportunity is richer than a general hunting area that has more readily available opportunity. And we have such a large resource in Montana that I think you can find success almost everywhere. I think we need to keep it short and simple if we can.
Okay, other folks, what do you think?
I agree.
Others? Okay, does anybody disagree? So are we saying that we can get rid of 3 and 4 there?
I would say yes, just because the definition of quality and opportunity are so broad for every individual. We have ample opportunity as residents in Montana. And if you're lucky enough, you will find a higher quality eventually, mathematically.
I agree with Mark. I think it adequately describes the issue that we're trying to present. And, you know, there's numerous issues within it, but we don't have to go into all of them.
Good
Yeah,
job.
I agree with what Casey just said.
Would anybody object to deleting those 2? Going once, going twice, delete. And we can get rid of bullet 3 there. Okay, season length and structure. What is that? How is there a conflict among stakeholders regarding management based on season length and structure?
I'm going to just throw this out there that I think that that's a piece of number 4.
I agree, Casey, but it's such a big issue. I mean, just thinking about shoulder seasons versus game damage versus whether we start on Aug 15 to get them off the hay ground and push them back up in the public. There's a lot of management implications. And in my experience, I found those to be super difficult discussions because they're very strongly held beliefs on what's most effective and fair to the elk and the landowners.
I was going to ask this question, and Dan, I think you provided a number of different answers. I was going to ask, what is it about season length and structure that is controversial or creating conflict? And there were several answers in there that Dan provided.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not diving into can of worms here or telling war stories or anything, but the number of people that, you know, the fact that we've doubled our bow hunters and we still have unlimited opportunity to do that into the future has really changed elk behavior significantly. And it's going to be something we're going to have to grapple with at some point. But I hear you, Dan. I don't have a problem with leaving it there, but it all goes back to into the bucket of what kind of experience we're offering and what reasonable expectation of success people have during those seasons.
I think it's definitely tied with number 4. I mean, we've got the most liberal season structure in the nation. And I wonder, you know, I think it seems like the conflicts that we have with private land, public land, elk distribution, I don't think it's a coincidence that we have the most volatile conflicts with that issue.
I would comment there if I could, please, Mike.
Go for it.
I agree with Casey's statement about the length of the archery season, the number of archery hunters. At some point, I think we're going to have to look at trying to reduce that quite a bit. And then I've also always been a proponent of date-specific tags for a shorter period of time, which would have the impact of reducing the number of people and the resulting overcrowding at any given point in time. So those are never popular topics, but those are something that I've long advocated for.
What do you folks think? Just, and I think I know what you're going to say, but just for a straw dog, what if we move season length and structure into parentheses behind widespread opportunities to hunt? Because I'm hearing some that they're the same thing, or at least related.
I would almost argue that, you know, that hunting opportunity and quality should maybe be under season length and structure. I think it's more important.
What do you folks think
I'm
about that?
totally opposed.
I'm sorry.
Totally opposed. I am totally opposed to changing the length of the season and the structure.
Well, we're not deciding to do anything right now. But
no, I understand that, but I wanted to get the other side of it. So there is a conflict there.
And that's what we're trying to capture. So let's try what was suggested there. Yeah, Sarah, before trade-offs up there. Oh, wait, I see what you're going to do. Yeah, let's do that. Yeah. And put like season length and structure, parentheses, trade-offs between hunting opportunity and quality.
I would say you probably ought to put landowner the number 4 underneath that too. The private sale of landowner tags, because that's kind of season structure, that's opportunity, that's.
Say that again.
This thing, I think the next bullet point, number 5, about private sale, I mean, that's a season structure, I think, permit level type discussion that will, you know, I think that's good. There you go.
I agree.
Okay, again, not putting words in your mouth. I'm trying to translate what I'm hearing. So what did I screw up?
The private landowner or private sale of landowner owner tags, we was trying to keep it so that they weren't selling the landowner preference tags to people outside of the family and people that work there.
But is the private sale of landowner tags part of conflicts in
Yes.
season length and structure?
Right now it isn't, but it may be in the future. I mean, there's a lot of disagreement about it, but it is not something you can do in Montana right now. But who knows how that may or may not change in the future.
Do we say the potential private sale of landowner tags?
I don't know that that fits well under number 4. It might be its own separate issue.
I would agree with that.
Are we talking about landowner preference tags, or do they actually give landowners tags in some places?
Dan, you want to tackle that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just say that, like, the part of the discussion that I was involved with, you know, originally, you know, ranching for wildlife has become such a red line in certain parts of Montana and certain stakeholders' opinions that we were trying to just, you know, right now you can't you can transfer tags to your family or a ranch employee, farm employee, and this was addressing the idea that comes up pretty regularly, where, you know, if you would just give the landowners the opportunity to sell these tags, they could do a better job managing elk populations than FWP does through its present license structure. So it's a debate that's been going on for years. Other states have tried it, in my opinion, unsuccessfully, as far as getting numbers down. So it could very well be an issue. It is not an issue yet as far as how elk are being managed, but you know, it's an area that I think you're going to hear a lot more about in the next couple of years.
So it's hypothetical at this point, but you can see it coming?
Well, I guess maybe Lindsay or the department people could tell me. They don't need to talk about the whether they see it coming or not. I'd just be curious as to what the status is right now in Montana on that issue. I don't think you can sell landowner preference tags.
That's correct. As far as I know, Dan, you can't sell it.
No, yeah, you cannot sell. You can transfer to a family member or employee, but you cannot sell. There was a bill last session that did not pass.
And then the only other response I have to somewhat of your question is, yeah, we hear about it a lot. We get asked about it a lot. But as of right now, it just is what it is, and you can't sell them.
And I do know there are some groups that are wanting to bring it up again. And if Jessica's on here, I know it's come out of the Paradise Valley and their survey of landowners, for example. And actually, I don't know if it's specific to landowners wanting to be able to sell the licenses specifically, or if it's more generally looking for ways for landowners to be able to make money from the elk presence on their land.
I just feel that we have to be careful of privatizing wildlife management.
So going back to, is there a conflict among stakeholders about the private sale of landowner tags?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
But it's hypothetical at this point because it's not legal. And there's, I mean, it's a particular issue that falls into regulation of elk hunting in Montana that there's probably dozens of them that we could list. But it's a particular one that's been a hot button topic around this.
So what do you think?
Just a little context to what Justin was saying. So the PERC report that came out of Paradise Valley called Elk in Paradise, when the eighth bullet or the eighth recommendation was to offer priority or transferable hunting tags to landowners who provide wildlife habitat. So that's where just, yeah.
So what do you think about the wording that Sarah just put up there? Does this capture what you're thinking? Or do we need to put more into it?
Just an idea, being that it is not an issue yet, but it's definitely is evident without private sale of landowner tags with ranching for wildlife. Do we want to change the sale of landowner tags to the potential for privatization of wildlife, or just the privatization of wildlife?
So I'll be the devil's advocate. Is it really the privatization of wildlife, or is it a way to compensate landowners for all of the habitat they provide for public wildlife?
Yeah, and that's definitely the confines of the conversation.
Yep.
So I don't, whether it's a conflict right now, I think it's, and whether we're using the right terms right now, this conflict of how do you compensate or whether you should compensate and how, if you say yes, landowners for quote unquote, the habitat and the opportunity and just, tolerance of elk on their landscape.
Well, it seems to me that privatization is one of those loaded words where it's going to evoke some strong reactions. So how do we capture, without judging, that the private sale of landowner tags, what is that conflict in there? People want to be able to do it. Some people don't want them to do it.
Well, I think it's providing direct, I don't like the word compensation necessarily, but there's a cost to having elk on your land. And historically, folks have looked at this as one way to help, make the landowner, just help the landowner's operation keep some traditional producers on the ground or on the landscape and viable. It could be abused greatly, and in other places it might work. Who knows? But it's very contentious. We could take it out too, because it's.
Well, if it's contentious and if it's part of what makes writing an elk management plan for Montana difficult, it should stay in. If it's really not a part of what the elk management plan is going to address, then you can take it out. So it's up to you.
So would a better bucket be how landowners are compensated for the impacts of public wildlife on private lands?
Or should they be compensated?
Sure.
I was going to say, I agree.
That's
with
probably the
Or
question.
should they be?
I think it's wise to keep that line of private sale of landowner tags. I mean, I think everyone's issue is the runaround of the randomized drawing system and going directly around FWP, and instead of buying your tag from them, you can now buy a tag from a landowner. No one has a problem, or the vast majority of people don't have a problem with trespass fees, landowner accepting compensation for hosting the habitat that is on their land, but it's the runaround of the randomized drawing system.
I think that's a good point.
We have a certain amount of pay to hunt areas, don't we?
What do you mean by that, Patrick?
The fact that there are people that will let you hunt on their land for so much a day or so much a week or whatever. Or
I'm sure there are, and there's block management also.
Yeah. So that, that should cover it rather than landowner tags.
Well, let's, without using the word should, is there a way do we need to even have, yeah, actually that doesn't bother me there, Sarah, but I'm trying to make sure that we aren't making recommendations here. So does the way number 5 is stated now capture already group's intent, and do we need the sub bullet 1 or other bullets?
Well, are there already programs in place to compensate landowners for elk damage?
Yes. But it's not, I don't think it's direct compensation so much as it is helping build stack yards, things of that nature.
Also, is this, talking about compensating private landowners, that seems like more of an appeal to the legislature than an appeal through an issue statement to the Fish, Wildlife, and Parks.
That's true too, because it requires the legislature for any of that. It's a legislative question for sure.
Could I add some historical perspective?
Go for it, Ed.
Yeah, I think this whole thing of landowner tags, that controversy might date back a little bit. Some years ago, there were the guaranteed tags that went to the outfitters. A certain block of guaranteed tags went to outfitters, and then hunters dealt with landowner or outfitters in some way and got those tags. And that was that feature was taken away here a few years ago by the legislature. And so really, I think over the past few years, it seems like there's been an abundance of those tags left over. So at this point in time, I'm not sure the landowner tag does, the transferable landowner tag does very much at all. If a hunter already has I can't see a private citizen pricing his tag at lower than market, it seems like they're going to be market price. So I don't think they're much of an issue right now.
Unless that tag was in a limited draw area.
Yeah, that could be.
And from the conservation hunting perspective, there's a fear and a concern that if a certain number of tags are given to X person, that person now has an incentive to keep public wildlife on their property for a longer period of time. So there's also that concern, in addition to, you know, what Justin was saying about having to go to a private person to buy tags.
I think when that was done in other states, those private or those transferable tags, it was based on, there was some negotiation with the game management agency, and then a number was arrived at as how many tags went with a particular piece of property. So I don't think it was a negotiable number that went up and down. It was just a set number.
So do folks think that addressing landowner compensation or private sale of landowner tags is within the purview of the elk management plan that FWP is going to draw up?
I think it is more in the perspective that from that PERC report, just leave the landowner tags part out, but landowners definitely take a whipping on some of this stuff, and Idaho obviously does something, and Wyoming tries to maintain a 60% favorable landowner relations number. So it might be time for us to start putting a little pressure on the FWP to try to up their acceptability factor there, whatever you want to call it. I don't know how to write it, but I think could be something in there, but leave the landowner tags out of it.
Okay, well, so that it's an honest question. I really don't know, but to what extent can FWP make decisions about landowner tags? I heard somebody say, you know, it falls within the purview of the legislature. So to what extent can FWP do anything about compensating for elk on private lands beyond what it already does?
Make recommendations.
Or create a new program.
Yeah, I would have to go through the legislature if there's money involved.
So does that mean that at this point right now, there's really nothing that FWP can do?
Correct.
So if it's outside of their purview, even though I think everybody would say, yeah, there's a problem that needs to be addressed there, but it should be addressed by the legislature. FWP can't make that decision. Is that a fair way to put it?
I think that's fair, Mike. I think initially, I think a lot of the thought behind having, you know, that landowner tag line in there was a potential guideline into the future if this management plan lasts for 10 years as a kind of a foundation block about what we see elk management in Montana being. But yeah, I think there's a certain argument to be made that you're relaying that argument to the wrong body.
Although, do you think that FWP should weigh in on compensation for private landowners? I mean, even a statement of something in the elk plan, because it's not going to go away. They're talking elk rents, elk compensation funds, transferable tags. I mean, there's a lot of stuff whirling around out there.
I think it should come from private citizens, go through the legislature. I have a little bit of an issue with agencies advocating for that kind of a program in the legislature.
Well, then, you know, if that's the case, you could make the argument that we got a 14-person body, citizen body, you know, making that argument.
I would agree with that. I mean, what better opportunity is there than this group to get something on the radar.
Other folks?
Yeah, as I think through this, I think it's best addressed, as Ed said, through a legislative avenue versus doing it here. Whether it's us as a working group or it's FWP as an agency, I think that's something that has historically been left to the legislature, and for us to take that on, I think it's problematic.
I kind of wonder if the discussion around compensation is even a little bit bigger than just elk itself. And those who are trying to provide guidance for an elk management plan. So elk are a very big piece of it, but elk compensation programs, I think, go beyond that and may have bigger implications across other pieces of wildlife management.
So I'm not advocating necessarily that people should be compensated, but if you're doing an issue statement, it's an issue. So is the issue one that we just decline to take on? And should we write it that way? And say it's for the legislature to decide? Is that a better way to handle it within the elk plan?
I guess that maybe my brain is getting muddled and I'm having difficulty really truly understanding what the issue is. Because at times I hear statements that kind of reflect what we discussed underneath number 2, but then there are pieces that aren't encumbered under that. So maybe I'm just struggling to understand what the true issue is.
So in general, I think it's private land, public wildlife issues. And so it covers all of them. And so there's recognition that private lands provide habitat for public wildlife. What's coming around the pike, though, is now, should they be compensated for doing that? So that's an issue. And we don't necessarily have to take it on. And I don't feel like anybody wants to, and I'm not sure I do either. But do you at least want to acknowledge that it's a conflict or an issue and go from there and throw it on the legislature?
I think that's a good point, Druska. I mean, we are this bold headline on the top is there are conflicts among the stakeholders, and the potential sale of landowner tags is certainly a conflict, and it's going to be one of the biggest conflicts this spring before the ink is dry on the final product of this management plan. And so whether we go into elaboration on the guiding principles or not on this issue is a different topic, but I think it's certainly one of the biggest conflicts of elk management for the future.
So
and I agree.
Here's a thought. You remember I talked earlier on about there are strategic considerations that in this case might be broader than the elk management plan. And so what if, and this is just a what if, the elk management plan needs to work on what exists now, and what's in the future may be hypothetical, but it would be appropriate for the group to strategically point out that, hey, we see this coming and we think this is going to be an issue. And so, you know, FWP, the legislature, whomever, will want to prepare. So
I agree with that.
It wouldn't be necessarily part of the issue statement here because it doesn't exist yet as an issue. But the group could say, we see it coming as an issue.
I mean, I agree with Druska and what I think where you're heading, Mike, but I actually think it is an issue now, and
Okay.
whether or not how landowner tags are dealt with is just one of the sub issues, and it gets to the impacts that private landowners bear as a result of having elk on their property. And there is definitely conflict that has existed for a long time around what to do about that. And we need to figure out how to get it in here somehow.
Okay. What other, it makes sense to me. What other folks think?
I agree with Casey. This is an issue that is simmering and is about to boil over, to use a metaphor. So I think it would be irresponsible of us not to put some kind of direction in here.
Okay, so how do we phrase number 5 there to capture this idea? You know, there's a problem simmering now. It's a conflict that already exists. What do we call that conflict? What is it?
Would it just be landowner compensation for elk impacts on private lands, and then a subheading would be just like we've got there, and we could list out potential compensation issues?
I think that's a good solution. Or just different types. Landowner tags, direct compensation, stuff.
What do other folks think?
We are coming to a point in Montana where we are going to have to address compensation of some form to the landowners. It's a fact. Otherwise, it's just going to totally blow up and it'll go to legislature and it'll be all over. One side or the other will lose.
What do you folks think about, look at the edits that Sarah did there. Is that capturing, are they capturing your thoughts?
Should we add impacts after elk? Just to be specific that we're not compensating people for having elk, but to offset impacts of elk to private land.
Yeah.
So is it impacts or just the basic fact that they provide habitat?
I think a lot of people would argue that it's just for having them on there.
Because I think if you start talking impacts, you're back up to number 2. And how do you monetize all the ag damage that happens, whether it's disease caused or crop?
What do folks think?
That's fine with me taking out impacts.
Yes.
I guess that makes sense if that's what the issue is.
The landowner compensation for providing elk habitat on private lands.
Yeah, and you wouldn't even necessarily have to have on private lands. It's a little redundant, but
True.
I mean, I go either way.
Yeah, I agree with that.
This is getting scary for me. This is a huge open-ended statement, I feel. So will the FWB be paying basically rent or a grazing fee to every landowner that has elk on their property?
I think at this point we're just saying that it's an issue or it's a conflict.
Okay.
Not that we agree or disagree, just that it is a conflict between stakeholders.
And I do think it's okay if we decide not to take it up, but we should identify it as a conflict.
Fair enough.
Maybe we're getting, we're getting into, I don't know, thin ice by putting compensation right on the top end of it. I mean, maybe it's more something around how to work with landowners on the impacts of elk on private lands. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of a hard one to put words around, but it's compensation is one of the potential tools in that obviously it's never going to go down the road of like paying rent for elk everywhere elk are. But how to wrestle with that, knowing that there are impacts to agricultural businesses. So
I think that's right, Casey. I mean, I think compensation could be a very hot button word, just like ransom for wildlife or harboring.
How about if you say recognizing landowners for their habitat contribution?
I actually think we ought to leave it kind of as this hot button phrasing, because I think it gets at where the where the point of contention is between us all. Like the fact that it makes myself and Mark uncomfortable to see that is probably a good sign that this is something that we need to address. So I want to water it down. I want it to be impactful for us, if that makes sense.
I think it goes directly to, at least in my situation, to the management of the elk. When the elk are directly costing me $100,000 a year, and right across the fence, a landowner is making $100,000 outfitting the elk out, that creates, I don't know, harboring opportunities rather than open access to hunting like we allow.
I almost also wonder if we've moved into the weeds a little bit on the initial landowner tags. I think, I think that is an issue right now, and I almost wonder if getting into the weeds a little bit on some of these other topics might breathe life into some of those where I don't foresee, the direct comp. I know that's an idea, but I don't foresee the direct compensation towards landowners for providing the elk habitat. I see that as a far more fringe topic than just the idea of transferable tags.
At the very least, it might be direct assistance.
So in the PERC report, they refer to elk rents. So wildlife use agreements, or elk compensation funds. So, and I'm not saying it would all have to come from FWP either. Maybe NGOs are going to step up and do something. But I think I like the potential for direct compensation or the potential for elk rents or elk use agreements. You could get compensation out of there if you wanted to by using elk rents or elk use agreements, if that made anybody happier. But there is something to be said for just recognizing the issue.
Hey, Druska, what is the PERC report?
So PERC is Property and Environment Research Center out of Bozeman, and they partnered with Paradise Valley and did a huge landowner survey about what keeps them up at night concerning elk. And, so all of the things we've been talking about are things that came up in the report. And then they put together a set of 13 recommendations. And some of those recommendations have to do with compensation.
Hey, Lindsay, is that report something you could share with the group before our next meeting?
You can find it on the internet.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's available online on PERC's website, but I can certainly share the link or something if you want.
So this is Dan Vermillion. Maybe a way to kind of move this conversation along would be to increase or maybe create a separate section that just says, since these are future changes that might affect elk management that we think people need to be aware of and that will affect the effectiveness of this plan, And that way you've kind of differentiated it between what is available as a tool right now and what may or may not be available down the road, and whether it's an effective tool.
So that kind of goes back to the, do you want this stuff to be considered now as a guiding, you know, a solution to that as a guiding principle in developing the upcoming elk management program? Or do you want to say that this program is going to need to be flexible in case or when compensation happens?
Compensation or direct sale of tags.
Yeah, right. But do you want to include it in this iteration, consideration of it in this iteration of the elk management plan, or say we see this coming and you need to be prepared, so that gets moved into a different place?
Hey, Mike, just a clarifying question, I guess, about the documents. So is it the expectation that issues that are identified in the issue statement, then we create guiding principles for each of those issues?
Roughly, yes. Okay, so the issue statement creates the justification for the guiding principles you come up with. So if you come up with a guiding principle and you can't find some sort of justification for it in the issue statement, then yeah, you need to create that justification. So what you could do is you could leave number 5 in there now and then go forward to the guiding principles part of it. And if you aren't able to come up with any guiding principles for that or any other part of it, you can say, well, maybe it shouldn't be in the issue statement. I don't know if I answered your question.
Yeah, that does. Thank you. Just kind of helps me think about, you know, where, and that makes sense too. Like if we think through these and can't come up with guiding principles that we're all comfortable with, and maybe there is a different spot for it, but that gives me a bigger picture about all of this actually.
Okay.
Mike, I would comment if I could, please. Yeah, I can understand everyone's concern about the compensation to landowners or the tags or something like that, but just some perspective from a lifetime spent in ranching and being kind of on the periphery of some of those government programs. Almost any kind of those things are going to have some kind of string attached. So, you know, the way I see that playing out at some point, if it ever does in the future, some sort of compensation to a landowner would in all likelihood include some sort of an access agreement type thing or something like that. And there are a lot of private landowners. In fact, most of the people I've worked for in a 40-year career that would be extremely reluctant to sign on to any kind of an agreement with the FWP, which is vulnerable to political pressure.
I have a question.
Oh, go. Go ahead.
Does the FWP have any say on this with the legislature?
I don't think so.
On the landowner tags or the direct compensation, will the FWP be able to say what they would prefer or anything, or are we just spinning our wheels on nothing right now?
We're not spinning our wheels, but at this point in time, it's just a concept. There's no development whatsoever to it as far as who has. It'll go through the whole normal process if it ever comes up.
Yeah, this is Ken McDonald. Ed's right in the sense that there's two ways FWP could be involved. One is if it was a bill that we were behind and proposing, And the other way is if somebody else proposes, a legislator proposes a bill, then we review it and, formulate a position on it, which could be support, oppose, or just be informational. And part of what's included when a bill gets drafted is a fiscal note that outlines the anticipated costs and then how you would pay for those costs. So there's no easy answer, but yeah, FWP would have some involvement in a topic like that if it went legislative.
So just to be clear, PERC is an organization that is not a government agency. It's based on market-based solutions. And so they would not have, they would not get tied up with legislative stuff like FWP would have to be. But the concept of elk rents is still controversial, or one to look at, because technically a landowner would be making money off public wildlife. Now, you can say they deserve to because they're providing the habitat, and then we're going back in a circle again. But if you have private money paying you for that habitat for those elk, that takes it out of the hands of FWP. And I don't know if that's the right thing or the wrong thing, but that's, anyway. So I don't, and then I would suggest we leave this and maybe everybody just thinks about it. And my only other comment is that it still seemed like the private sale of landowner tags was something most of the sportsmen in this group were really concerned about. So I'm not sure we should throw that out with the compensation question.
Well, so this is a really good discussion. I appreciate the way everybody's weighing in, because it's difficult. I think the group has two choices going forward. Okay, you can leave it in, and then when we go to the next step about coming up with guiding principles, it's like, well, if we don't come up with any for recognizing landowners, then we can pitch it from the issue statement. Or you can take it out, and then if we find ourselves coming up with guiding principles that have to do with recognizing landowners, we can put it back in. So those are two possibilities.
I vote we leave it in and move on.
That works.
That works for me.
Is there anybody for whom that does not work?
One thing I'm just going to say before I move on, for anybody who didn't see the chat box, Everett has posted a link to that PERC report. So if you click on that link, it'll take you to where you can download it off of the PERC website.
Okay, moving on. If you look down at the additional challenges, are there any there that need to be moved up under the heading of conflicts among stakeholders?
Hey, Mike, in one of our breakout sessions this morning, we talked about that 5-year review. And the director was in there with us, and she commented that it was probably good to have that benchmark there. And I think Dan said that earlier yesterday. I just don't know where we would put that. I just didn't want it getting lost.
Oh, yeah.
Is that a guiding principle?
That'll be a guiding principle, definitely. Sarah, can you scroll up to the preamble? Okay, it doesn't necessarily say anything in there about the problem of the plan getting dated, but we can worry about that later. Yeah, it would definitely be a guiding principle, or it just might be a strategic principle. It's like, no matter what you do, FWP, we want a 5-year review or a 3-year review or whatever. Okay. So, but the short answer is, yeah, we will definitely not forget that. We will get to that. Is there anything under the additional challenges that you feel like should be moved up?
Not for me.
Yeah, I think they all look like issues, but I don't really know if they generate a conflict tab.
Okay. Anybody else?
Hey, Mike, one issue that we haven't really talked about that I kind of thought of earlier would be, and I guess I don't know where this would fit in the statement, but the issue of elk driving up the price of land in Montana to the point where it's really hard for young farmers and ranchers to get involved in agriculture. So I don't know where that would fit in the report, but I do think it's a major issue that that's being caused by elk.
It doesn't fit. That's a seller prerogative to set the price.
Is there anything that FWP could do in its elk management plan to address that?
No.
Well, there is, but it would involve limited permits and affecting the opportunity level to the point where if you're a non-resident, there would be no realistic opportunity to hunt on your own land. But you have to still retain that 10%. So there are ways you could do that, but it's probably not something that we're going to be able to address.
I mean, maybe it could potentially be one issue that's addressed with landowner preference tags that we were talking about a little bit earlier.
Yeah, I think it's an impact. I'm not sure. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. What does everybody else think?
I don't see any way to really work with that. It would be basically a real estate problem.
Right, a real estate problem potentially caused by elk management.
Correct.
Well, Sarah, let's put that under additional challenges so we don't forget about it. And also let's put the need for periodic review. Make sure we've got that there. Oh, you got it. Okay. Thank you.
The one on the land, it could affect just as much the other way, that the land wouldn't be worth as much because of depredation all the time by elk.
I just really wonder about how relevant that issue is. I mean, we're not talking about our effects on car insurance rates for driving through elk habitat. And
that's a great analogy.
Tell me about it.
I think that gets analogy of the day. So I'd like to start to tie this up in a bow for today. You guys have put a lot of hard work into this, and what I'd like you to do is read through what you have and see if you're in it. If not, what's missing? See what if other perspectives, other stakeholders are in it. And if not, what are they missing? What are we missing? So go ahead and take a chance to read over it.
You want to start at the top again?
You guys want to start with the preamble or just deal with the conflicts?
Conflicts for me.
I'd like to see the whole thing, please.
Let's try this. One moment. Can you read that all right?
Yes, thanks, Sarah.
Hey, Mike, this is Brian Wakeling. I have a procedural question for you.
Bring it. Yeah.
So we did receive some public comment today. I'm just kind of curious whether or not anybody has any considerations regarding that comment that we received.
I actually had a thought. I'm with Mark and I are both Mark Cook, who talked about the Predators and the Wolves via the phone earlier. We are both on the Region 2 CAC, and he has a lot of really good thoughts from that perspective of being a non-consumptor, which I agree that term is not quite accurate anymore. But I had some thoughts further with Lindsay a little bit about if non-consumptive users were actually represented. And I hope I'm not speaking out of turn as I say this, Lindsay, so correct me right now if I need to. But I think a lot of us identify in some ways as non-consumptive users. We're not always a consumptive user on the landscape. So I was thinking about it a little bit too, Brian, or whoever asked about it earlier. About your presence on the working group.
I agree with you, Everett.
So this is Dan Vermillion, didn't we kind of try to deal with that in the third bullet point under to succeed in the preamble, where their natural resource held in public trust by FWP for the benefit of all Montanans? So that would, implicitly include both consumptive and non-consumptive users.
I agree with Dan, and I also think that we're talking about sustaining healthy elk herds on lands on public lands in Montana. We're also sustaining predator populations in those same areas that benefit natural hunters as much as humans.
Yeah.
And we covered it quite a bit in the PowerPoint of how Montana manages wildlife, if I remember correctly.
So circling back to tying a bow on it for today, does anybody not see their perspective captured in the issue statement as currently written? And I should say accurately represented.
Hey, Mike, I think one thing that it's probably included in these other statements, so maybe I'm just thinking out loud, but what about like environmental impacts of elk? And maybe that would be related to the biological carrying capacity.
That was just something on the top of my mind. Thanks, Joel, for enunciating that. And it made me think about, someone had mentioned, climate, and we kind of had a discussion on how to phrase that. So I didn't want to, I guess, maybe forget that piece. Climate falls into a bunch of other sort of environmental factors that influence distribution, health, and all those things.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Sarah, could you go up to where it says additional challenges include and before that. And yeah, just enter a few times. So we spend a lot of time thinking about conflicts, and that's important, but Sarah, if you could just type other concerns include. So environmental impact.
Maybe this is a place to put the value of elk to natural predators or whatever the large carnivores.
Through this whole thing, we have been talking about areas that had either too many elk or just enough elk, and we haven't confronted anything about the northwestern part of Montana where we're really short on elk.
That was the question I was just getting ready to mention. Is when we start talking about wolves, are sportsmen ready to give up some elk to feed the wolves?
So maybe we should say areas that are chronically under objective, or elk management units that are chronically under objective.
Yeah, and I mean, those are issues where I thought about those a lot, and I kind of just chalked that up to, tab number 1, where disagreement about population objectives, but maybe we do need to eventually put a discussion in there about working towards those objectives too, if they're chronically low.
It can also fit in the maintaining healthy habitat across varied public land management agencies.
Sarah, did you get that? There you go.
Will you repeat it? Sorry, I was trying to figure out where we were.
We had a discussion yesterday about habitat issues that kind of got dropped off the list somewhere along the way, and my phrasing is maintaining healthy elk habitat across varied land management agencies. Kind of it's a cross-cutting issue because a lot of it's outside of FWP's purview, but it impacts populations and their distribution.
Other things besides conflict that should be considered in an elk management plan. Okay, hearing none. Here is what I would suggest for the group going forward. Let's run with what we have now. And if we continue down the road and we find out there's some things that we need to add or subtract, we will. But one thing that is totally up to the group is how much of this do you want shared with people in between this meeting and the next meeting?
Mike, I might have an addition, not to hog the time
No,
while you're
hog it.
wrapping up your bow. What about, I know the shoulder season has proven to be effective in some places. What about the stress on the elk towards the 6th month of season when they're most vulnerable and the weather can be at its worst and they're in survival mode? Would that be something to put under other concerns?
Let's
I
do it.
wonder if you want to put that under section 4 where it says season length and structure.
Okay.
Yeah, it's already in there. Under there.
So you want to put it under number 4, stress on elk after what'd you say, 6 months, a 6-month long hunting season or long hunting seasons?
You could just put long hunting season.
Okay.
I think you since we're talking about the conflict and trying to generally just describe it, it's going to be use of shoulder seasons, something like that. And that certainly is one perspective on it, is the hunters' concern about the length of the season and impact on the population, but it's also been popular from ranchers, so that's a conflict for sure.
Okay. Do you like how Sarah's got it typed out right now?
Yeah, I'm happy with it, just so that so we don't forget about it. We can tweak it later.
So going back to my question, how does the group feel about sharing this information?
How have you done in the past, and are there any cons to sharing it before it's refined?
So yeah, there are cons, but in some ways I don't think that you could, because this has been a public process, I don't think you could not share. I mean, people can tune into YouTube and see what we did, but I'll tell you this, that nobody other than you, or who has suffered through 2 days on YouTube with you, knows how much work went into this and how hard everybody deliberated and how difficult the discussions were on time at times. And so there's a real capacity for this stuff to be misunderstood, and particularly if they don't know exactly what we're trying to do with an issue statement. Okay. So in sharing with people, and actually, I see real benefits to that, because, everybody can go out to their trap lines and talk to other folks. But you're going to want to make very, 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 very super sure that people know that what you're talking about is a draft and not a final product. And you're going to want to make sure they understand how this draft came to be and what it's intended to do, because it is very easily misunderstood.
This is available online though, correct? Recorded and saved?
Yeah.
If I'm fine if they want to put in the work to view it, then they can view it and maybe not advertise it.
Yeah, I think that's, I don't know. You don't need to go send it around, but if someone wants to watch it, they certainly can. It's publicly viewable and it's a transparent process, but there's a lot of background information that has no context by just looking at this document.
Yeah, so some groups in the past have said, well, it's publicly available, online. You can watch the YouTube video, but nobody emails out the document. Okay, so that
I agree.
I think that's wise.
In my experience, that can blow these groups up when people start doing that. So I think you're right.
Is there a way for them to comment if they are looking at it though?
That's a good question. Lindsay?
Well, I guess what's the intent of sharing it at this point in the process?
Well, it would be up to you. Like, if, I know other folks that have concerns about this, I'd like to talk to them about it. All right. There are lots of ways you can do that. Sending them an email with an attachment may not be a good way, because once it's gone, it can go anywhere. And the context for the document, like somebody just said, is completely lost. So.
Right. So I guess back to sort of Ally's question is this a point in the process where we would be soliciting comment, where we would be?
Yeah. Lindsay, do you have a way for the public to comment online or via email or anything like that? So in between group sessions?
No, Mike, we don't have anything like that set up for now. So the next formal scheduled public comment period would be during the next meeting. And I'm looking right now, yeah, it's on the next meeting on Thursday as well. So the second day of the next meeting.
Okay.
Other than that, we don't have anything else set up.
Okay.
Well, I can see parts in this that would be very explosive if they didn't understand where we was at with this.
Other folks, what do you think? It's an agreement. Whatever you guys agree will be something that will be a handshake among folks.
I say no, no emails and accept public comment at the next meeting.
Yeah, I say if someone wants to look at it, they can watch the videos online.
Yep.
Agreed.
I agree. I think also, obviously, just putting a watermark across both pages that says draft would be wise as well.
Yeah, I was
Very
gonna
good
say,
point, Dan.
I would do that before sending this to you.
Okay.
I've got a question for Lindsay.
Go ahead.
There was another comment that you read, right? I think it was right before lunch, and I didn't fully, it didn't soak in what it was. It was something about objectives.
Yep.
Would you mind reading that again?
Yep. And I can certainly give you some perspective on that as well. So the question was from Daniel Kinka: considering that elk are managed below biological carrying capacity in parts of Montana, while social carrying capacity is concurrently increasing, will the group consider increasing elk quotas anywhere? And my response to that, and I will give you a chance to talk here in a sec, is just, all along we've talked about this group is not tasked with setting objectives. And so we can talk about what metric to use for objectives, how frequently those objectives should be met. But this group is not going to take on the task of deciding whether to increase or decrease objectives anywhere, and that needs to be a conversation that includes more people at a local level. So that's my response to that question, but that was Daniel's comment repeated.
Okay, I feel like we've covered that with number 3 in our concerns, other concerns with the chronically under objective. It's in there moving forward.
Okay. Any other thoughts on what we've done today?
What are your thoughts, Mike, on the direction that we're headed or the progress that we've made with only 2 days left?
So you're going to think I'm sucking up like, oh, I bet he says that to all the groups, but you guys have been exceptional. This is really, really good progress. So you're working really well together. I think you're getting at the heart of the situation. And so getting an issue statement this well crafted in 2 days is, I'm not sure I've seen that before. So I think you're making outstanding progress. I know it probably seemed really tedious and brutal at times, but you can also ask whether as a group with your different perspectives, you know, any of us could have arrived at this statement alone. So I think that you got something here to feel proud about. And honestly, I think you're going to need to feel proud about it as, you know, you get some of the headwinds that come from being a group member producing something like this. I think we're in a real good place to go forward. So what I'm going to ask people to do is to take a look at this and think about it over until our next meeting. Again, keep asking yourself, do I see myself in it? Do I see other people in it that need to be seen? And particularly for these other concerns where, you know, we didn't spend as much time on, do we have enough there? Do we need to elaborate on those? And then sort of start making the mental shift. Next time we start, we're going to say, okay, this is the problem. We've defined the problem really well. So now, if we solve the problem perfectly, what would we accomplish? Okay, and those are going to be the guiding principles. All right, and so it's not, you remember I talked about 3 different things. We have strategic, okay, fundamental, and means. Strategic means, hey, this is what we want to accomplish no matter what. We don't necessarily need to think about those for this exercise. Means are, well, okay, these are the things that we can do. All right, like, you know, well, you know, FWP could, I don't know, whatever. These are the things that we can do. Okay, those are means principles, and we don't want to think about those. So fundamental principles are like, this is where we want to go. This is what we want to accomplish. If I have this problem, here's what the solution looks like. Okay, so start making that mental transition, because all of our guiding principles are going to need to trace back to this issue statement. You don't want to have any issues in there your guiding principles don't address. Did that make any sense at all? I think I'm turning into a Zoom zombie. So anybody have a somewhat of a decent idea about going forward? I'm just going to take that as a yes.
Mike, I'd probably do better if I could read that, what you just said.
All right, I'll send an email out to the group.
That would be good. Thank you.
You bet.
Can we also, I'm assuming Sarah's going to send the 2 pages that are in front of us. Is that correct?
Yeah, I was gonna say I'll send this to Lindsay after we're done here, and she can send it out to all of you. We'll have a watermark like we were just talking about. I also want to give you a heads up that this is a 10-page document. So we've been taking each of your small group work and combining them so we have a record of that. So scroll down to the end where it says this draft 1 of the combined statement to read this. And
Okay.
one other thing I'm going to do, I'm going to change these to like 8 pages. So that's the only other change I'll make to this document before sending that to you guys.
Thank you.
All right. Closing thoughts. Lindsay, want to close it up for today and tell folks what's going on next?
Yeah, I think you guys did an amazing job today. I'm super impressed with the progress you made, and I enjoyed listening to all of your conversations. I think we are going in a great direction. So thank you for your time today and for being with us. Also, thank you to all the public who tuned in and those who made public comments. Special thank you to Pat and Missy, who helped us start and stop and stream meetings all day long. Big shout out to our facilitators, Mike and Sarah. You guys did a great job today and yesterday. at getting the group to where we are, where they are currently. So that is much appreciated. Thank you to my recorders, so Cami, Emily, and Brian, who recorded all of those breakout rooms so that we have records of those as well. And then also all the other technical advisors on the call that have helped me answer questions all day long. So overall, I think we had a great 2-day meeting. Of course, I wish we could be in person, but thank you for hanging in there and making do with what we have available. Yep, I just see a comment from Joel of Liberty. Ren had to cut out early. So he also said, thanks for everything. He left maybe half an hour ago. The next meeting will be December 16th and 17th, again on this online Zoom format. Again, I wish we could be in person, but with our current situation, I don't think it will happen. So I will send out the link to that meeting earlier in the week. So probably the Monday before that meeting happens. Any last questions from any of you? Okay, I will be sending that document to you from Sarah as soon as I get it. Yeah, and have a great rest of your week and weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks for hanging in there, people. You rock.
Thank you.